So you're very welcome to this interview we're having this afternoon with Alan Gilsenan. Alan is a fantastic filmmaker who MoLI commissioned to produce a film installation responding to Joyce's Ulysses. And we've been showing episodes from this film installation online over the last few weeks, and we're culminating today on Bloomsday by showing the whole film. So that film has lived and continues to live in a beautiful room on the top floor of MoLI, where people can sit down and watch it in its entirety. But the pandemic actually prompted Alan to get in touch and suggest maybe we release it episodically online, and we're delighted that we did. And delighted that Alan could join us today from his eyrie in Wicklow. So I suppose to jump right into it, Alan, the commission itself predates my own involvement in the museum. How did it come about?
Well, I mean, it was real joy, but it had a kind of strange beginning. A couple of years back, I was in the beautiful island of Florianopolis off the coast of Brazil, an exotic starting point there at the invitation of the university and Beatrice Bastos, a good friend of ours and of MoLI's. And I was screening a number of films, and I screened a film that I had made many years ago about Yeats, and Yeats is mainly is interested in the occult. And it's a very abstract, very experimental film. I think quite a challenging film in lots of ways. And after the screening, Professor Margaret Kelleher, your good friend and colleague from UCD and from MoLI, was there, and the Irish ambassador at the time, Brian Glynn. And they both kind of separately had, I suppose, the germ of a thought that, maybe we should do something similar, approach Joyce, perhaps approach Ulysses in a similar way, and in a kind of abstract experimental kind of filmic response. So really, I think that was the germ of it. It came out of that very kind of casual conversation and that idea that they both had independently. And of course, I was, delighted to respond. And it's a rare privilege, particularly in film. In the world of film and television, it's such a kind of cutthroat, nasty place to be most of the time. That it's very rare you get commissioned to do something as, challenging, and I'm sure we'll come to that, but as delightful as this, and it was a real, I'm not being sycophantic because I'm talking to you, but, it was a real honor to be asked, and also, a real kind of artistic joy to have such an open canvas, to have something that wasn't prescriptive and that wasn't, you have to do this, you have to do that. It was very open-ended, and that was a real challenge and pleasure.
Of course, yeah. One of the things I know when I started working on the museum project myself, I used to take the odd break sitting in the park across the way, facing this bust of Joyce. And I kind of, I found it quite unnerving as that I always felt, that statue is looking over at what we're doing in here, and does it approve? Did you find the subject unnerving in that way, dealing with this kind of, towering monolith of Irish writing? I know you'd engaged with Yeats as well. Did it feel different with Joyce?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. There were moments that, I kind of went through various stages. The first, is kind of, looking back, a certain arrogance, delight, great. Oh, Ulysses, brilliant. Oh, I can do that. But then as soon as I stopped and thought about it, I was going, oh, Christ, and then, that was the second phase, the kind of, that slightly unnerving feeling that you were in the face of, a genuine, huge figure in literature and an extraordinary book. But then I suppose the third phase, and it was the one that I always had to come back to, was that you had to dismiss that. You couldn't do anything if you were kind of in awe of him and of the work. Huge respect, of course, humbled to be trying to make something that's an echo of Ulysses. But I realized pretty soon that if I got too reverential, and I did occasionally, you'd get tied up in knots, that it was very important to step back from that and almost take a more irreverent attitude to Joyce in the book. And there was also, an interesting thing for me, at least, is that even though I'd studied literature and I'd certainly read Ulysses, maybe twice, and certainly admired it, there was something in my gut, something emotionally wasn't connecting with it, that I would have huge, I would be hugely drawn to Yeats and to Beckett. If you're talking about the greats of Irish literature, though that's a kind of dubious term in itself. But somehow I wasn't drawn to Joyce in the same way. And I remember saying this to Margaret very early on, that one of the great challenges and delights about doing this was that it was kind of forcing me to go back to Joyce and to go back to Ulysses. So many people probably say, "Oh, I'd love to read Ulysses sometime," and they don't. And this was like I was being given my homework, and I was being forced to go back and encounter Joyce, which of course I knew must be this extraordinary world. But for whatever reason, I wasn't drawn to it, and that, of course, was my lack. And when I thought about that, I think there are a couple of things around Joyce that you well know, and that I think MoLI, embraces fully, is that to a degree, Joyce, because of his fame and his elevation in world literature, that there was a kind of over reverence of him, which actually removed him from the world of literature. So that on the one hand, you had the Joyce, who was this kind of, academic god, that was this feature of such intense engagement and study that it kind of removed the readers from the book, perhaps. But secondly, there was also this kind of whiff of amateur dramatics about it, that as soon as you mentioned Ulysses, I had images of people in, costumes wandering around Sandy Cove, quaffing champagne. And somehow I think maybe that's distanced us from Joyce and from Ulysses. And I think one of the great things about MoLI is it's bringing us back to him. So to cut a long story short, I suppose for me it was a great, incentive to be forced to go back and say, okay, I didn't really get Joyce before, so let me try and appreciate him now. And certainly I have come away from this project of ours, with extraordinary respect and reverence for him.
Yeah, I've a lot of empathy for that actually as well. It's interesting kind of having, even myself in the position I'm in, I'd studied Joyce in university. I was, I've read most everything, but coming back to it in a different way and having to consider, how do people engage with this subject? And actually, one of the things that struck me about the film was that it was really looking at the book not as something necessarily to be just studied or to be just mimicked, but it was to be, it was looking at it as a work of art, and then, as you say, creating another artwork as an echo out of it. The structure, I know a lot of these things. It's like finding the structure early on is often a lot of the work, and you settled eventually on doing it episodically. Tell us a bit about that and how you arrived at that point. I know it might seem obvious that that's how one would do it, but I'm sure it wasn't.
I suppose there was certain practicality to that. First of all, I was very conscious that I didn't want to, in any way, dramatize the book. That this was not going to be a film of the book. I'm not even sure that's possible. But that it would be kind of as we talked about, a kind of reading, a personal response to the book, one small echo of a book of many, many multitudinous echoes. And I was very kind of aware that it would probably be an abstract engagement with it, not a linear one. And yet I also felt, I had to give the film a certain structure, and what better structure than the one that Joyce gave it himself. And his schema, his plan, and I know there are variations on the plan for the book, became my plan for the film. That those beautiful documents, where he's listing out the colors or the organs or the subjects that relate to each of the episodes. That sort of became my plan for the film in a way. And often when I do any film, I tend to map it out visually rather than, in words. I will tend to map it out almost as a series of blocks. So it seemed that Joyce's own schema, his own structure for the book, seemed the perfect kind of structure for our film. But also I was aware that, in MoLI, while occasionally maybe somebody will sit down and watch the whole film, people would dip in and out. And so there was also that practical sense that if you wander into the beautiful room in MoLI, first of all, which episode it is. And even if you stay for 2 or 3 minutes, hopefully you take something from it.
Mm. And is that did you find that particularly challenging as somebody who makes films that have a beginning, middle, and end, that within this environment, it's nearly circular? It's more like Finnegan's Wake, it's on a loop.
I quite like that, actually, to be honest. There's something in me always resists the linear, the kind of the linear of, the 3-act structure or whatever. I think it's almost become too prescriptive, that almost the audience can tell where a story is going or where a film is going, because it follows a formulaic thing. So I quite liked, it's certainly challenging that you place a film even in as beautiful a space as it is, that people pass through it, that perhaps there's noise and, that people mightn't stay or they might look in. But on the other hand, there's something very liberating in that, that you're not stuck with the kind of come in, sit down, let's start. So I really relish the kind of non-linear possibilities, and I suppose that then having decided just to stick with Joyce's structure in a sense, that then it was a matter of going back to basics, that in a way it was like trying to empty my mind of all the preconceptions I talked about earlier, and of course literally sit down with the book and open it on page 1, and pretend, okay, forget everything I know and just read this as a book, and then having read it a couple of times and being kind of wowed by it, and delighted by it, and seeing things that I'd never remembered or never even imagined were in the book. Then the next step for me was to get up and kind of walk. And I think often with filmmaking, you can sit at your desk long enough, and at a certain point. So I suppose really without any firm ideas, then I would have gone out and kind of walked Joyce's Dublin, literally, and taken photographs and just wandered around. And something Ulysses does wonderfully, but it's something that I really believe is, that time is a continuum, that the past, the present, and the future, that they're all part of one. And of course, Ulysses has that, that if you walk down Sandyman Strand or into Glasnevin or wherever it is, of course things have changed and Dublin has changed and modernized, but there's still things where you feel the ghosts of the past coexist, that sort of strange space, that when you're in a heightened sensitivity, perhaps, there's been a birth or a death or something, that time that you walk out in the street and the street looks totally different because your sensitivity is heightened. And somehow reading Ulysses and then walking the streets of Dublin, you have the same feeling of intensity. And that alertness to not only did Joyce, as a man living in space and time, walked these streets that we're walking on now, but also his fictional characters walk these streets that we walked on now. And in the same way that I'm a great believer always in the past and the present coexisting, I think also the imaginative, and the factual coexist. Our imagined lives as we wander down the street, as Bloom did, as Stephen did, coexist with our real prosaic lives of having breakfast or going to the toilet or whatever. And so, one of the things I found that by just walking the streets, and it's a thing I always say with any film, is sometimes you just got to get out and walk. Walking is a great thing. So I would have walked Dublin and walked the streets and tried to connect the places physically, geographically to the book, visually, of course, crucially for me, but also imaginatively. And then it seemed to me that one of the things that echoed very strongly for me in the book was this sense of ghosts, the sense of, which relates to this past and present thing, that there's a sense of the ghosts are with us, the ghosts of the past, the ghosts of fiction, and that seemed very strong, or at least my reading of the book, that seemed very strong to me. And very much early in the process, I went to visit Newman House and had a wonderful tour. And then was left alone to wander around, and was in the wonderful hall, the Aula Maxima, where the majority of your exhibition now stands so beautifully. But it was kind of mothballed and dusty. And it was just before the renovation. And I remember wanting to capture that and wanting to film that. That there was something in that dusty, majestic room that carried the ghosts of the past, of the students, of Joyce sitting in exam there, and still does, even though now it's very beautiful and sophisticated and shiny. Yeah. And so that was always kind of, I suppose, part of the process, was just being alert to that. And I suppose the third stage, not to over talk this, was that I then went to see the actual manuscripts, many of which are either in the fabulous Rosenberg Institute in Philadelphia or the Buffalo collection in Buffalo and upstate New York, but also private collections that have been kindly brought to your attention, people like Desmond Green and Glenn Johnson in New York. And I suppose one of the things about that, going on that kind of wider pilgrimage, going to see Joyce's grave in Zurich, it was partly to film, of course, but also to encounter the book in its original state. If one looks at Joyce's manuscripts, they are extraordinary washes of color and notation, and, to look at his notes and his notebooks. And actually, even in, I can remember in Buffalo, seeing his glasses, seeing his passport, seeing his cane, that these seemed extraordinarily potent. But one of the things that I decided is, let me try and encounter them as kind of visual objects, kind of icons of this book. So very much, there's been obviously brilliant academic study of every nuance of these notebooks and of the drafts of Ulysses. But I suppose I thought, well, let me just look at these as visual objects, as paintings, as abstract paintings, with a view to including them in the film.
Because they do represent this, like you say, this kind of material iconography of the subject of Joyce himself, that then gets in a way parodied sometimes into this kind of other level of presentation of him. And the fact that you use this film to not only respond to the novel, but actually to respond to his past within this building that I'm in at the moment. It's just, there's a lovely kind of quantum approach to it that I think he'd really appreciate himself.
Yeah, well, I hope.
what were were there any real particular challenges with it? I mean, beyond the obvious challenge of just purely the task itself, but and the subject matter. But was there anything that it threw up that you found?
I mean, it threw up a multitude of things. Of course, you feel, immediately you feel you haven't read enough, you haven't studied enough, you don't understand enough. You're there with some very learned scholar or librarian who's pointing out some minutiae in a page, and you're going, I never don't know what that is, But I realized very soon that that's not what I was going to bring to it. That it was to bring more of a kind of personal response. I felt that if I could just kind of winnow out moments, images, music, words, either graphically or heard, that it's like a little distillation. It's like one distillation, of the book that I would hope acts as a doorway into the book, that you'd see it and say, you'd see a little phrase on screen and think, oh, that's beautiful. I want to read that book. I want to see more of that. And it's almost, I selected short passages, and I selected pieces of text that I would use, and other visual references, but you could almost have selected anything. That's the wonder of the book. But it was almost to do something that I felt should be more minimal. I found, there's the temptation as a filmmaker to show off, and you can lean towards visual extravagance. Whereas actually I felt with this, that the more I took away, as we edited it with Bjorn Migilla, my wonderful editor, that it was more about distilling it. It was taking more away, and hopefully then that in the gaps, the book itself can shine.
Mm. And your own practice as an artist yourself, what did this project, I suppose, expose within that for yourself, or did it illuminate something new for you as an artist? Did it kind of alter your practice in any way?
I think it gave me an opportunity, I think, to lean towards, to follow my instincts, which I really believe in. But also, I think what it did, and I think what Joyce does, is it liberates us. Whatever we do in the arts, whether you're a writer, a filmmaker, or a poet, or a musician, that you almost read Ulysses, A Finnegan's Wake, and you realize how conservative we all still are. Whatever, 100 years on, that there is a terrible conservatism has crept into a lot of the arts, and that's related to this sort of craven desire for success and for fame and for acclamation, and I think Joyce is a real inspiration in terms of being a radical figure, a figure who doesn't take any hostages, that just follows his lights. And I think that was reinforced for me, and also just the ambition and the poetic vision of, so much of the discussions around Ulysses is, amazing how this man can capture a moment in time, one day in the history of Dublin, and you could nearly recreate Dublin from the book and all that. And that's all true. But there is a poetry to it that I felt was very strong. Mm. And, that was one of the reasons why, for a long time, I tried to talk now like this was all planned out. But of course, as so much for me is instinct, and you feel your way and something feels right then. And that's what you go with. But for a while I toyed with the idea of, do I have a voice? Do I have some reading passages? Do I not? You know, does that limit the possibilities of the book? But then I remember distinctly driving down Sandyman Strand with the poet Paul Durkin, and Paul was saying to me, "What are you doing?" And I was saying this, and he just lit up about Ulysses. And he talked about when he was a young man in his early 20s with the other wonderful poet Michael Hartnett, who was a great friend of his, and the two of them would walk on Sandyman Strand. And he said, "We imagined we were Joyce." And you know, and he talked of Joyce as a poet, and also, of course, I also know Paul as an extraordinary performer of his own poetry, and again, it was just in that moment I thought, well, he is the perfect person to read this. And I think often, you know, with all due respect to actors, I often think writers are the best readers of other writers. You know, that actors somehow instinctively bring another dimension that takes it away. And so I suppose the poetry for the book shone for me. And that was something that I tried to capture. And then it seemed natural that Paul might be the person who would read the passages in the film. And indeed, you know, he was extraordinarily, I mean, I think Paul maybe read Ulysses again 7 or 8 times in the course of the process of us making the film. So he was a real, you know, collaborator, and he was really able to illuminate stuff for me that maybe I hadn't seen.
Yeah, his voice is just so beautiful on it. It was such a, and I mean, I remember the day when you called me and said, "I think I have Paul Durkin doing the narration." And it was kind of amazing for us to be able to include another artist even in the project, because, I mean, that's something that's, you know, is very important to this museum, is actually engaging people from other art forms as well with the literary material. And the copyright was only lifted on much of Joyce's work at the beginning of 2012. So this film, I suppose, is, I mean, I think it might be like the first film that's like really grappled. I mean, aside from the film version in the 60s, but the first one that's really grappled with it, from one artist to another. I mean, is it something that you do? I mean, is it something that you think it's important for other artists to engage with Joyce, to continue doing that?
Absolutely. You know, I think, you know, I talked at the beginning about, you know, not wanting to be overawed or too reverent to the book. And I think that's true. You know, I think you shouldn't be reverent. You should just grab it. So as I say that, I realize now that I have become reverent of the book, you know, that the process of making the film has made me, you know, really appreciate, maybe I'm just a bit slow, I think that's possible, but appreciate the extraordinary imaginative depth. You know, it is a universe. I mean, I think that was his achievement. He set out to create in one day in time a universe, and he succeeded. And, you know, even as I talk to you now, I feel a compulsion to go back and read it, you know. So I think if the film, among many, many things, inspires people to pick it up again, you know, I think any artist in any art form, just even dipping into a page of Ulysses on a day, will find that it's a kind of inspiration, both in terms of its, you know, its ambition, its radical, and it still feels radical now, but also it has great heart. It has great heart in it. You know, it is intellectual, and it is, you know, remarkably erudite and learned book, but it's also a book of heart and soul and beauty. And I think that often gets forgotten, you know, that this is just, you know, a remarkable, profound poem to life, and that you could literally open any page and read it, and you know, I think it would lift your spirits, for the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything that you're working on at the moment that you'd like to tell us about, or that is even related in some way to it? Or
no, I mean, I'm writing a bit now. Thankfully, lockdown has afforded me the time to stop and do a bit of writing. I'm always a bit superstitious about talking about things that are coming down the tracks, but certainly the experience of this was so freeing and liberating, and I'm really genuinely grateful to MoLI for that. That I think that'll really, it certainly enthused me, for my work. I think we all need some things that reignite us. Sometimes it's playing a piece of music in the morning. Sometimes, when you're going through, as I'm sure many artists are at this time with lockdown, and, they're trudging through trying to, keep making work, that occasionally you need to go back to the source to give you that spark. And certainly the experience of doing this certainly did that for me.
Well, we're delighted that the film is still in situ here in the museum. We'll be opening up again to the public, thank God, on July the 20th. So folks can come in and have a look at it in here as well. And of course, we'll be screening it later on today online. So Alan, thanks so much for taking the time. It's been really lovely to have a chat about it. We probably never actually, the two of us, sat down to talk about the film. I remember a lot of early conversations in the Conrad Hotel over coffee and croissants and lovely long oblique musings about it early on. But it was such
me spoofing, and I'm still spoofing.
I count myself amongst that number as well. But it was such a pleasure to see how the film turned out, and it's a real privilege for us to have had you involved in it. So thanks so much again.
Thank you, and to all your colleagues in MoLI. It's a real honor, to have the film screened up there on the top floor.